Hello there, and you're very welcome to Prime Time. Well, first tonight, the summer is here. Restrictions are decreasing and many people are dreaming about holidaying abroad. But can they? Is it safe? And when will it be allowed? Here's Louise Byrne.
Abandoned airports, deserted destinations, months of cancelled holidays.
My summer holiday plans was to spend it in Mallorca. I definitely will not be leaving Ireland.
Tour operators desperate to stay in business.
The travel industry itself is literally, I would say, has fallen on its knees, and we need to kind of get people back flying.
And while recent good weather has been some solace, for many of us, an overseas trip is a highlight of the year.
So as much as we value what's on our doorstep, is there flight at the end of the tunnel? When you go on a foreign holiday, it usually starts here.
But before you even get to the airport, how will the holiday experience change? Air Coach is planning to resume its operations in August, but with far fewer seats.
Once they enter the coach, they'll see a big difference. They'll see a lot of the seats blocked off, basically under social distance. And this particular coach that we're on is normally a 49-seat coach, but actually, because of the 2 metre social distancing rule, that now means that there can only be 11 available seats on the coach, which is a massive, massive difference.
The driver often would help with suitcases, things like that. Would that be out of the question?
Our driver will still be able to assist, but what they will be required to do in order to assist is to wear a mask and to wear some gloves.
Fewer passengers means running effectively at a loss.
Although we're planning for the best situation, that's going to be very, very difficult under a business model that only allows us to sell 25% of our seats. I mean, that won't actually even cover the driver's costs and the fuel costs of running the vehicle. It is that stark.
At the moment, Irish airports are eerily quiet. No queues, empty luggage carousels and shuttered bars and restaurants. But it will change. A roadmap to reopening air travel has been published by the European Safety Agency. It's a guide to getting back flying. You won't be able to come into the terminal if you're dropping or collecting a passenger. Once inside, masks are recommended and social distancing of 1.5 metres. Irish airports haven't said yet what distance will be implemented here.
Social distancing isn't really a problem when there's hardly anyone taking planes. Here in Cork Airport today, just 2 aircraft departed. But for the very large, long-haul aircrafts, a fully socially distant queue for the boarding gate could be a kilometre long.
I think it's going to be more like what airports were 30 or 40 years ago. They're assembly points, they're used for security clearance, for customs checks, and to get people on board aircraft. There'll be much less retail activity in airports for the foreseeable future.
After check-in, security queues will be an issue. The European guidelines warn plastic trays are frequently contaminated, so they should be cleaned more often, and hand disinfectant should be available going through security.
I do think that if those guidelines are applied, flying is safe. At the start it will be possible because the number of passengers will still be reasonably low, but at some stage the number of passengers is going to increase, but that will also correspond to a decrease in the level of the disease.
Both Aer Lingus and Ryanair have announced new flying protocols.
To keep everyone safe and well, our cabin crew will be wearing face masks for the duration of your flight. It is now mandatory for all passengers to wear a face mask or covering to fly with us.
Aer Lingus won't have a trolley service on short-haul routes. Ryanair says it will, with contactless payment only. The airplanes have sophisticated air filtration systems, but there has been some criticism over how often the cabins will be disinfected. Once a day is the plan, not after every flight. The European guidelines are not mandatory, there is no sanction for non-implementation, and there are also real worries about how passengers will react to the new measures.
What happens if on board an aircraft, suddenly a passenger decides to not wear his or her mask anymore? We know that the management of unruly passengers has become a difficulty in our sector for different reasons. And we fear that all those new constraints are going to create possibly more anxiety, more stress on the passengers, who may react in a way which is a bit difficult to manage.
By far, though, the biggest issue currently facing would-be Irish holidaymakers comes down to one word.
Quarantine.
Obviously, we have the 14-day quarantine rule in as well here in Ireland. So that's a huge disadvantage at the moment, and we really, really need the government to actually lift that. That's a priority at the moment. So people can go on their holidays.
So the quarantine protocols that have been put in place in Ireland mean that it's very difficult for airlines to start services in a significant way. So I don't think there's been enough urgency at a political level given to the role of aviation in helping recover the Irish economy.
The quarantine requirements here are out of step with many European destinations. Italy, hit hardest by COVID-19, was among the first places to reopen its borders. Portugal is also already welcoming visitors, with beaches and hotels opening over the weekend. Both France and Greece have earmarked June 15th for the lifting of their travel restrictions, while Ireland's favourite destination, Spain, will welcome tourists from the 1st of July. None of these countries will be applying a quarantine. The government here says the travel restrictions are in line with medical advice. But when that changes and air travel is an option, what might your holiday look like once you get there? While beaches, bars and restaurants are reopening around Europe, social distancing measures remain in place. In Galicia, northern Spain, there's an elaborate plan to divide up the beach with rope partitions. The warnings of over-tourism seem like a world away. Most in the travel industry are looking to the Canary Islands for the first large-scale return of tourists. Lanzarote had just 6 deaths and is now almost COVID-free. Geraldine McFadden runs hotels and restaurants in the region.
The island is ready from July. I mean, there's going to be more bars and restaurants open. The last couple of weeks, they've been open up with 50% on their terraces. This week, we went into also 40% inside. Well, I suppose the initial arrival at the hotels, there will be a screen, like, you know, the bank-type screens on reception. And that'll be so that the reception staff don't have to wear face masks all day. If you can see the sunbeds here by the pool, they'll all be distanced 2 to 3 metres. So there won't be all the sunbeds together, and hopefully we won't have everybody, you know, doing what everybody does on holidays, running for the sunbeds first thing in the morning. I hope there's some positive comes out of this.
Restaurants and bars could be where regulations become tricky.
Social distancing when the Irish are away on holidays, having a few drinks and a sing-song is going to be definitely a challenge, because I think little by little we'll adapt.
Flights are resuming from Ireland to Lanzarote next month, but Geraldine reckons locals are fearful of a return of visitors.
We are now more or less COVID-free, and people are nervous of tourists coming back, but we have to be realistic. Without tourists, we've no economy.
Travel agents say while bookings are being made for August and September, many holidaymakers have reservations about travelling.
We know that while there's lack of confidence out there with travelling, people are very afraid to go on their holidays. And we have to kind of manage those kind of expectations for clients and make sure procedures are in place in the airports and hotels, you know, in order for them to have a holiday. They want a holiday. What is a holiday? You know, people are asking, like, will things happen, you know, when they get there? Will things be closed down? One thing or another. But, you know, hoteliers, resorts are doing their best to maintain a normal environment for people, but also while respecting the social distancing rules that are going to be in place as well when they're on their holidays.
The current Irish government advice against overseas travel is presenting issues for people who previously booked for this summer. You won't be insured to go, but you won't get a refund if you don't. So all things considered, when regular flights return next month, will anyone be on them?
I'd like to say yes, I'd go tomorrow, but I know I won't. You just got to be that little bit extra careful.
We picked, I think it's 5 or 6 days at the first week of October. And so the big thing now will be any quarantine. So coming back into the country, if we have to quarantine for 14 days, wouldn't really be practical for us.
I really think that, for my family's sake and my own sake, it's safer to stay at home.
So
I won't be going anywhere. I'll be staying in Dublin for the foreseeable future.
That report was from Louise Byrne. I'm now joined in studio by Donal Moriarty, who's Chief Corporate Affairs Officer with our Lingus, and from Limerick by Brendan Griffin, Minister of State of Tourism and Sport. Welcome to you both. Let me start with you, Donal Moriarty. I know, like many people we listen to there, you want to get rid of the 2-week quarantine, but I suppose from a government and public health point of view, it's safe to stop people and protect us from COVID-19 coming into the country?
Yep. Well, firstly, we welcome the easing of restrictions in the economy announced yesterday or implemented yesterday. But the easing of travel restrictions were notable by their absence. In terms of Ireland's success in dealing with the crisis, it's at an equivalent level to other European member states. And as outlined on the VT there is a protocol introduced by EASA and the European Centre for Disease Prevention and Control to make air travel safe again. Airlines and airports are stepping up and implementing that protocol. And the European Commission has invited member states to progressively reintroduce air travel based upon that protocol. Now, other member states have done that. Ireland is notable by not having done it. It hasn't announced when it's going to do it and what its plan is.
Is it just caution, though, and good sense? I mean, we saw Israel today having to pull the brakes on the easing of their restrictions because of a spike in infections. Is it not sensible to have the quarantine for 2 weeks to make sure no people come in here with the disease?
Well, I mean, from an Irish economy perspective, it's critical. Not just, in terms of people going to Spain on holidays, it's critical, connectivity is critical to the functioning of the Irish economy. That's been acknowledged quite widely. I notice IBEC have been out in the last 24 hours emphasising that criticality. It can be done in a cautious way. The European Centre for Disease Prevention and Control has outlined that cautious way, and that's what we're proposing to implement and what airports in Ireland are proposing to implement. But we need the corresponding action by government in terms of easing of travel restrictions.
OK, and I'm going to put that to Brendan Griffin in a moment. 2 other points Louise raised there in the film. The fact that you're going to only really disinfect the planes once a day, do you not think that will frighten a lot of passengers? That's
not the case in Aer Lingus' case. We are disinfecting our airplanes on the turn at our home base, so it happens multiple times during the day. At night, we perform a deep clean of the airplane, including full disinfection of all hard surfaces. And we do a lesser clean, but a very effective clean multiple times during the course of the day.
What about face masks? Louise also made the point if a passenger decides not to wear the face mask, what can be done?
Well, from an Aer Lingus perspective, it's mandatory on board our aircraft. That's clearly communicated before passengers ever get near the aircraft. There are instances for young children or people with health conditions that prevent them using face masks where it isn't mandatory. But we are clearly communicating our policy, and that all our passengers will be very well aware of that.
Can they be by law they'll be removed from the plane?
Well, they can be denied boarding at first instance.
Until they do it halfway across the Irish Sea or something?
Well, we have protocols in place to deal with that on board the aircraft. But I have to say, passengers and our customers are very compliant and agreeable to the measures that we've introduced, and that's been our experience in the limited flying we're doing to date.
OK, Brendan Griffin, on the quarantine first, you heard obviously Donal talking also about other countries have done it, and I suppose thousands of jobs could be lost.
Yeah, good evening, Miriam, and good evening, Donal. Yes, we're very concerned about the jobs in the economy that are at risk and that will not come back until things return to normal, and that is the case for so many various sectors. But primarily we are still in a major public health emergency, and whereas we have made great progress to date, at the same time we're still not finished, and we know that we still have many deaths happening and we still have new cases of COVID-19 as well being diagnosed daily. So we still have a bit to go. And until we go further along the road, we won't be able to see the return to normality that we all want to see. But certainly we're making great progress. And we know from last Friday as well, because of that progress, we are able to accelerate some of the things that we thought were unthinkable only a few short weeks ago.
Let me come back
so
in there.
We will continue to work with partners.
Okay, let me come back in there. I can hear people all over the tourism trade in this country pulling their hair out, going, look, countries like Spain, Portugal, we heard there in Louise's report, they don't have this quarantine. Why do we have it?
Well, they do have the quarantine, and it's there for a number of weeks for many countries. The other side of that is that, you can't just compare one country with another. There are many various factors at play here. We're on different timelines in many cases. What we want to do here is reduce the number of new cases to as close to zero as possible, and thereafter hopefully return to as close as a normal economy as we can possibly return to, but at the same time then as well deal with any new clusters or new cases that may arise without having to go back down into a second lockdown, which would be hugely damaging for the country. So we are working with all of our partners, with various other government departments, with the Department of Taoiseach, with agencies to try to get the best possible outcome here. And we want to see, no one wants to see this happening, no one wants to see this quarantine, but we are in extraordinary times. And it's really important that we get this right. If we get this wrong, people lose their lives.
Are you hinting there, Brendan Griffin, that it could be lifted sooner than people think?
Well, as we know, there was a roadmap set out a number of weeks ago, and because of the great work that all of the Irish people have done over the last number of weeks and months, we've been able to bring forward opening times, for example, to June 29th for hotels and restaurants and bars that serve food and so many other attractions as well. And that's really encouraging, and that's very positive. And similarly, I think if we see a continuation of the progress that we have already seen to date, it is very possible that we'll see more improvements and freeing up of some of the restrictions that are there. But may I also add as well, I think it's really...
Let me come back in there for a moment. Have you actually asked for it to go away? Have you looked for it?
Well, what we're looking at are solutions that are compatible with the best public health advice.
Is that a yes or a no?
All of us, of course... Well, what we want to do is do it safely, and I want to see it happening, but only if it's done safely and not jeopardising the health of people here in host communities, employees within the tourism sector, people working within aviation itself, right across the board. So we have to get this right, we have to be responsible. I'm acutely aware of how many people's jobs are at stake. I'm aware of all the figures that show us the extra jobs that could be created by a freeing up of the restrictions. But at the same time, it's critically important that we get this right, and that we also don't jeopardise the potential of our own domestic tourism market.
Just on the jobs issue, I mean, we heard today the industry saying 90% of restaurants do not believe they're going to be in a position to open up on the 29th of June because of the 2-metre rule. Will that be relooked at?
Well, the document that was published today by Fault Ireland, and I commend them, there's huge work gone into that from everybody in the industry to Fault people, in the government department here and the Department of Tourism and Health have all worked really closely together to get that document going. And it is a living document, so it is open to change as things evolve. And we know that things are evolving rapidly and thankfully evolving in the right direction as well. So that is open to change, and we know that an extra 80,000 jobs could potentially be created by moving from 2 to 1. So if
Moriarty.
That is permissible, we will do that.
Okay, Donal Moriarty.
Well, I welcome the indication of potential movement. I would point out that in multiple other member states that travel is being encouraged in the month of June and no later by the 1st of July. So there is a real urgency that needs to be applied to these decisions. And businesses across the country, not just aviation, need sight of that plan in order to reasonably plan their businesses.
Very quick question on change fees. Ryanair out today saying they're not going to charge any fees for people who book flights in July and August. Is that the case with Aer Lingus?
There are no change fees applied to... If a customer wants to change their booking, no change fees are applied in Aer Lingus.
Finally, Ingrid Miley had a story this evening. Briefly, it was on the RTE News. It's about an early agreement between the unions and management in Aer Lingus and a programme of pay cuts and work reforms, described by many as pretty draconian. Are the unions on board for that?
we're in the early stages of discussion, Miriam, and that document is an early draft document. So it's a bit disappointing that it's in the public domain at this point, but we're in the early stages of those discussions. From an Aer Lingus perspective, obviously everything it sees in that document we don't believe to be a particular difficulty for anybody, but we're in the early stages of those discussions.
Has it been put to the unions?
They've seen a draft document, yes.
And they've seen that draft?
And we're in the process of discussion in respect of that document.
OK. Donal Moriarty, thank you so much for coming in this evening. Brendan Griffin, thank you too for joining us from Limerick.